The human who defied the machines. The Drakari Dominion had never lost a war. Their empire spanned 78 star systems, their fleets numbered in the millions, and their warriors were bred for combat. Their ships, a seamless fusion of organic metallic biotechnology, could adapt to any enemy's attack. Their bureaucratic systems ensured that no warrior ever fought without authorization, no fleet ever moved without approval, and no single failure ever occurred without being documented and analyzed. For over 1,000 years, they had ruled the galaxy with meticulous precision, crushing rebellion after rebellion with sheer logistical superiority. There was no need for brute strength when an enemy's supply chains could be dismantled by regulatory warfare. They had anticipated every possible threat, except for one, a single human with a wrench. The arrival of the fleet. Outpost 47KX, a remote repair station orbiting the gas giant Cyphos 9, was about as unimportant as a military outpost could be. The Drakari High Command had assigned their least competent officers there, bureaucrats who had failed to meet the Empire's impossible efficiency quotas. They never expected to see battle. They never expected an enemy to even notice them. But then the alarms blared. A Drakari fleet was approaching. Fast. Inside the rusted and chaotic maintenance bay, a lone human leaned back in a creaky chair, chewing lazily on a piece of synthetic gum. He glanced at the flashing red alerts on his screen, sighed, and muttered, "Great. Another day, another fleet trying to blow us up." His name was Daniel Wade, and he was, at least according to his official personnel file, a necessary inconvenience. To put it simply, he was a mechanic, not a soldier, not an officer, not even an engineer. Just a guy who fixed things. And somehow, he was about to go to war. The unstoppable bureaucratic nightmare. The Drakari fleet surrounded the outpost with mathematical precision. 12 identical warships, each polished to a mirror-like sheen, aligned themselves in perfect formation. The ships were designed for intimidation, covered in obsidian black armor plating and glowing violet energy veins that pulsed with an ominous hum. Drakari soldiers were notoriously methodical. Every one of their 1,287 combat protocols had been meticulously optimized over centuries. Each officer carried a 12,000-page operations manual, and every engagement began with an official pre-battle procedural review, lasting exactly 2 hours and 27 minutes. This time, however, they had already filed the necessary paperwork in advance. They had come prepared to destroy Outpost 47KX. And yet, deep inside their flagship's command deck, Supreme Logistics Admiral Zivak Thrall hesitated. His synthetic neural monocle scanned the outpost's defensive systems. No activated weapons, no energy shields, no distress signals, nothing but a junkyard of broken machinery. Thrall frowned. Something was wrong. This station wasn't fortified or battle-ready. It wasn't even organized. The Drakari Empire had conquered countless worlds, fought highly trained generals, and destroyed technologically superior civilizations, yet not once had they ever encountered an enemy that looked like this. A single human, wearing a grease-stained jacket, staring at their fleet while casually sipping a cup of non-regulation coffee. Admiral Thrall scowled. He turned to his aide and ordered, "Deploy the ground infiltration team. I want that station under our control in 20 minutes." And just like that, the invasion began. The human and his wrench. Daniel Wade wiped oil-stained hands on his jacket as he glanced at the incoming dropships. Big, fancy, over-designed pieces of garbage. He sighed, tossing his coffee cup aside. "All right, let's see how many rules I can break today." He wasn't a soldier, but he had something far more dangerous than an army. He had common sense. The Drakari warships were technological masterpieces, but their biggest flaw was also their greatest strength. They were too complicated. For centuries, Drakari engineers had been designing and improving their systems, each revision adding more redundancy, more security features, more layers of unnecessary complexity. Their ships needed approval from 6 different AI systems just to turn on their engines. Their weapons required biometric verification for every single shot fired. Their armor was calibrated for extreme conditions, but their power grid was wired through an outdated central control module, one that no one had bothered updating in over 300 years. And that was where Daniel saw an opportunity. Because he had one tool that the Drakari never accounted for: a wrench. The battle begins. The first Drakari assault team stormed into the maintenance bay, weapons drawn, scanning for any sign of resistance. Instead, they found Daniel Wade, sitting on top of a half-disassembled engine, spinning his wrench in one hand. "Hey guys," he said, grinning. "Hope you're ready for some serious disappointment." The Drakari warriors hesitated. Their manuals had no instructions for this. Daniel casually leaned forward, and before anyone could stop him, threw the wrench. It clanged against a vital control panel, which sparked violently before exploding in a shower of sparks. Immediately, the station's emergency override systems kicked in. Lights flickered, sirens blared, doors slammed shut. And then, the Drakari warships shut down. Every single one. Admiral Thrall's neural monocle nearly short-circuited as error messages flooded his screen. Warning. System override DTCTE. Critical power failure imminent. Reboot sequence required. Estimated time 14 hours. The entire fleet had just been disabled. By a human. With a wrench. Admiral Thrall's expression twisted in pure horror. Daniel Wade. He just leaned back in his chair and smirked. "You guys really should learn how to fix things manually." The Great Shutdown Crisis. For the first time in Drakari history, an entire fleet had been disabled without a single shot being fired. The cause? A human mechanic with a wrench. Admiral Zivek Thrall, Supreme Logistics Commander of the Drakari Dominion's 12th Fleet, had always prided himself on his strategic foresight. He had led countless military campaigns, navigated endless bureaucratic labyrinths, and outmaneuvered the greatest tactical minds in the galaxy. And yet, as he stood on the bridge of his immobilized flagship, staring at the critical system failure alerts flashing across his neural interface, he was forced to confront a terrifying realization. He had been outmaneuvered by a man who fixed vending machines for a living. His entire battle fleet, each ship a masterpiece of technological precision, was now completely useless. And the human had done it, with a single well-placed throw. Zevak's monocle interface glitched, struggling to process the cascading failures flooding the network. Across the fleet, shipboard AI systems were crashing, emergency subroutines were malfunctioning, and thousands of technicians were frantically trying to reset their systems manually, something they had never been trained to do. The Great Drakari war machine, known for its ruthless efficiency and flawless logistics, had been brought to its knees by a man wielding outdated Earth tools. Zivak clenched his jaw, his rage barely contained. This was unacceptable. The human problem. Back on Outpost 47KX, Daniel Wade was kicking back in his chair, watching the chaos unfold with a grin. The station's security feed showed Drakari soldiers panicking as their ships refused to respond to commands. Even their weapons, which required at least 3 biometric confirmations before firing, were non-functional. Daniel had seen this coming. Drakari engineering was obsessively precise, their systems too dependent on centralized AI oversight. Every single function, from engine ignition to coffee machine calibration, had to be approved through a bureaucratic chain of commands so bloated that a simple power reset required a minimum of 6 authorization requests. He had exploited that weakness perfectly. By disrupting a single key system, he had triggered a galactic-scale paperwork nightmare. Now their fleet was trapped in an infinite loop of self-diagnosis and failure reports, each system waiting for approval from another system that was already offline. And the best part, Daniel hadn't even broken anything permanently. Everything was technically still operational. The Drakari just couldn't figure out how to bypass their own protocols. He took another sip of coffee, shaking his head. How the hell have these guys not been conquered already? But as he watched the fleet struggle to recover, he knew that this wasn't over. The Drakari weren't just going to give up. They were going to retaliate. And when they did, they would make damn sure that he paid for this humiliation. Plan B. The bureaucratic blitzkrieg. Admiral Zivak Thrall took a deep, controlled breath. Yes, his fleet was disabled. Yes, his ships were helpless. Yes, his entire command structure had collapsed under its own complexity. But the Drakari Dominion did not need weapons to win wars. They had something far more dangerous. Bureaucracy. He turned to his communications officer, voice cold and precise. File an emergency protocol violation report. The officer's fingers trembled as they entered the command override codes. Immediately, a high-priority bureaucratic distress signal was broadcast across the system, pinging every Drakari regulatory department in the Dominion. Within seconds, automated responses flooded in. Unauthorized system tampering detected. Suspicious non-Drakari engineering activity reported. Commencing full internal audit of affected systems. Requisitioning additional forms for compliance review. A low humming noise filled the bridge as paperwork drones deployed from the fleet's central command hub, each one carrying thousands of regulatory forms designed to analyze and counteract unsanctioned modifications. If they couldn't fight the human, they would drown him in paperwork. Within minutes, every terminal on Outpost 47KX lit up with official bureaucratic requests. Your recent actions require a 27-page justification report. Your tool usage has been flagged as unregulated maintenance. Please submit an equipment approval form. Unauthorized system interference detected. Prepare for immediate corporate compliance audit. Daniel stared at his screen. Then he burst out laughing. Oh my God, they're trying to beat me with paperwork. He had to admit, it was a bold move. Unfortunately for them, he had spent 3 years working maintenance for a Terran government-funded space station. And if there was one thing the human mechanic knew how to do, it was bullshitting paperwork. The counterattack. Daniel cracked his knuckles and got to work. He hacked into the fleet's audit system, found the bureaucratic loopholes, and flooded their network with so many redundant compliance reports that their entire paperwork AI grid crashed from overload. The Drakari watched in horror as their own bureaucratic war machine turned against them. New automated errors appeared. Due to excessive paperwork volume, all compliance investigations have been delayed indefinitely. Critical administrative backlog detected. Estimated processing time, 37 years. Your request to investigate unauthorized system tampering has been rejected due to non-compliance with Data Filing Protocol 447C. Admiral Zivak's monocle flickered violently as his systems looped into submission. His fleet was now not only disabled, but officially stuck in an eternal paperwork crisis. Daniel leaned back, arms crossed. Nice try, fellas. The final humiliation. Defeated. Humiliated, trapped in their own red tape. Admiral Zivak stared blankly at his screens. This wasn't war. This wasn't battle. This was an absolute disaster. And worst of all, the human was smiling. That was the moment Zivak realized something truly horrifying. This wasn't just an enemy. This was a force of nature. A species that looked at the galaxy's most advanced civilizations and said, "Why don't you just hit it with a wrench?" Zivak took a deep breath. Then, through gritted teeth, he gave the most painful order of his career. All units, retreat. Across the fleet, Drakari officers gasped. Retreat. From a single human. And yet, as their screens flickered with error messages, they all knew. They had no other choice. One by one, the mighty Drakari warships began limping away, their systems still locked in bureaucratic purgatory. And as they left, Daniel Wade raised his wrench in salute. "Come back anytime, boys. I'll keep a wrench ready for ya." The revenge of the Drakari Dominion. The Drakari Dominion had never known defeat. They had conquered entire star systems with their impenetrable bureaucratic warfare, forcing enemies into submission through regulatory strangleholds. Their war machines were perfect, their protocols flawless, and their logistics unbreakable. Yet, for the first time in their 1,000-year reign, they had been forced to retreat, not because of an invincible armada or advanced alien technology, but because of a single human mechanic armed with a wrench and a total disregard for proper paperwork. It was a humiliation beyond measure. Admiral Zivak Thrall had been stripped of his rank, demoted to sub-adjutant of fleet compliance oversight, a position so bureaucratically meaningless that he was now responsible for approving toilet maintenance logs on deep space cargo freighters. But humiliation wasn't nearly enough for the Drakari Dominion. The human had defied them, mocked them, exposed their greatest weakness. And so, deep within the towering halls of the Imperial War Council, a decision was made. Daniel Wade had to be eliminated. Not just killed, erased, wiped from existence, his name purged from all records, his species taught a lesson that would never be forgotten. The Drakari would not stop until they had restored their pride. And this time, they were bringing everything. The Drakari's ultimate plan. Daniel Wade had made one fatal mistake. He had embarrassed the wrong empire. The Drakari were no longer interested in a simple military response that had already failed. This time, they would unleash every tool at their disposal. Their plan would operate in 3 phases. Total galactic lockdown. They would brand Daniel Wade as the galaxy's most wanted criminal, making it impossible for him to buy, sell, or travel anywhere. Information warfare. They would rewrite history, ensuring that Daniel Wade was remembered not as a genius mechanic, but as a dangerous terrorist responsible for crimes against efficiency. The ultimate trap. When the moment was right, they would lure him into a situation where he had no escape and eliminate him permanently. The greatest minds of the Dominion spent weeks crafting this plan, analyzing every possible variable, ensuring that there was no way out. Victory was inevitable. And then they launched their counterattack. The lockdown begins. Daniel Wade had just finished tightening the coolant valve on Outpost 47K's thruster systems when he noticed something strange. His station ID chip, which had always given him access to fuel, supplies, and maintenance requests, was now flashing a warning message. Access restricted. Use your FLAGGD as NONCOMPLINT. Daniel frowned. Ha! He tried to purchase a pack of synthetic gum from the station's vending machine. Denied. He attempted to log into the station's communication grid. ERRR. Use your DOE's NOTEXS. And then, as if to make things worse, the station's emergency broadcast system came online. A massive holographic projection flickered into existence above the outpost, displaying an official Drakari wanted poster with his face on it. Galactic Notice. Wanted before crimes against administrative protocols. BADVICD. SUBGCT is EXTRMELW dangerous. Reward. 500,000 COREDITS. For information LEDDing to his APREHN. Daniel blinked. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. A galaxy turned against him. Within hours, Daniel's name was blacklisted from every major trade hub in the sector. No ships would refuel him. No merchants would sell to him. No ports would grant him access. Even criminal organizations, who typically thrived on ignoring the law, refused to deal with him. Because the Drakari Dominion had done something far worse than labeling him a criminal. They had labeled him a bureaucratic liability. And no one in the galaxy was willing to risk the mountains of paperwork required to help him. Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. All right, so they shut me out of the economy. What's next? And that's when the news broadcasts began. The smear campaign. The Drakari didn't just want to catch Daniel Wade. They wanted to destroy his legacy. Across the galaxy, Holomet news stations ran manufactured stories about him. Daniel Wade, a man who sabotaged an entire fleet for Fivan. New Europeortius CONFIRM. Daniel Wade may be dorking for a reveal or Jainization. EXTLUSAV. YTHS human mechanics is THEBAGG ist 3AT to intergalactic stability. They even fabricated an interview with a former colleague who claimed that Daniel once rewired an entire ship using nothing but duct tape and an unhealthy disregard for safety regulations. And worst of all, they created an AI-generated video of Daniel saying, "I hate efficiency, and I think proper paperwork is for cowards." The entire galaxy turned against him overnight. And Daniel, he just stared at the screen in disbelief. Then, after a long moment, he muttered, "I gotta admit, I didn't see that one coming." The ultimate trap. With the lockdown and smear campaign in full effect, the final phase of the Drakari's plan was ready. They knew that Daniel would need supplies eventually. So they set a trap. A distant space station, neutral territory, outside of Drakari jurisdiction, sent out a distress signal, claiming to have the resources he needed. A desperate cry for help. Daniel hesitated. It was obviously bait. Obviously. But what if it wasn't? What if real people were in danger? His gut told him to ignore it. His conscience said otherwise. And so, against all better judgment, Daniel Wade hopped into his ship, grabbed his trusty wrench, and set a course for the most dangerous mistake of his life. Because the Drakari Dominion was waiting for him. And this time, they had brought everything. The Battle of Station Alpha 9. For the first time in his absurdly chaotic life, Daniel Wade knew he was walking into a trap. It wasn't a hunch or a suspicion. It was a cold, hard fact. The distress signal from Station Alpha 9 had appeared just as the entire galaxy turned against him. It promised safe harbor, fuel, and supplies, everything he desperately needed after the Drakari blacklisted his name across the cosmos. It was too perfect, too convenient, and yet, Daniel couldn't ignore it. Because if there was one irrefutable law of the universe, it was this. When someone asks for help, you don't just walk away, even if it's obviously a trap. Arrival at Alpha 9. Alpha 9 was a rusted hulk of a station, floating like a corpse in the cold void of space. It was a former trading hub, now long abandoned, except for the dim flickers of emergency lighting still struggling to function. Daniel's ship, the Irregularity, drifted cautiously toward the docking port. His fingers hovered over the manual controls, ready to burn fuel and bail if something felt off. The station's hangar doors creaked open. "Well," Daniel muttered, "guess we're doing this." He brought his ship in for a soft landing, grabbed his trusty wrench, and took his first cautious steps into the unknown. Silence. No gunfire. No alarms. No Drakari warriors waiting for him. Only the distant hum of failing life support systems. Daniel narrowed his eyes. This was too easy. The ghosts of Alpha 9. The station was old, its metal corridors corroded by time and neglect. Flickering monitors displayed frozen error messages, and the air smelled stale, like no one had been here for decades. So why had there been a distress signal? Daniel advanced slowly, gripping his wrench like a weapon, his ears straining for any hint of movement. Then he saw it. A single figure collapsed near a maintenance hatch. Daniel rushed forward and turned them over, only to find a holographic projection fizzling out. A decoy. And then, from the station's speaker systems, a familiar voice crackled to life. Daniel Wade. Daniel's stomach dropped. He knew that voice. It was Admiral Zivak Thrall. You fell for it. The Drakari officer sneered. Just like we knew you would. And that's when all hell broke loose. The ambush. With a deafening roar, the station's bulkhead doors slammed shut behind him. From the ceiling, hidden turrets unfolded, their barrels glowing as they locked onto him. Daniel dove for cover, cursing. Oh, come on. You guys and your stupid, overcomplicated traps. The walls shifted, revealing Drakari commandos hidden behind stealth panels. 10. No, 20. All armed, all aiming directly at him. A lesser man would have surrendered immediately. Daniel. He grinned. I was wondering when you'd show up. Then he whipped his wrench straight into the nearest turret, jamming its servo motors just as it was about to fire. The weapon exploded in a shower of sparks, and before the Drakari could react, Daniel was already on the move. Escape through the machine graveyard. Alpha 9 had once been a repair station, which meant it was full of broken-down ships, outdated droids, and scrap metal piled up in forgotten maintenance bays. Daniel knew machines. More importantly, he knew how to break them. Diving into an abandoned engineering bay, he yanked a control panel open and started rewiring the station's security system. Behind him, the Drakari commandos stormed in. Wait, you cannot escape. Daniel didn't even look up. Escape? Who said anything about escaping? He finished the final connection, yanked a lever, and suddenly, every single, rusty, broken, forgotten, battle droid, powered up. The chaos unleashed. The Drakari hesitated. For 1-2 seconds, just long enough for every malfunctioning war machine in the bay to suddenly jerk to life. Half of them were missing arms, the other half were staggering on failing servos, but they all had weapons. Daniel stepped behind a safety barrier, grinning. Have fun, boys. And then the entire room exploded into chaos. The Drakari warriors opened fire, but the droids retaliated, unloading their ancient munitions with reckless abandon. The battle spiraled out of control almost immediately. Turrets malfunctioned, explosives misfired, and entire sections of the station's infrastructure began collapsing under the madness. In the middle of it all, Daniel grabbed his wrench and slipped away. Face to face with the Admiral, Daniel fled deeper into the station, weaving through corridors as firefights erupted all around him. And then he found himself face to face with Admiral Zivak Thrall. The Drakari officer stood alone at the end of the hallway, weapon drawn, expression furious. Daniel wiped grease from his forehead. You again? Zivak's eyes burned with hatred. You humiliated me, human. You made a mockery of our empire. Daniel shrugged. It's not my fault you guys overcomplicate literally everything. The Admiral's grip tightened on his weapon. I will not let you walk away this time. Daniel smirked. Oh, buddy. You don't get it, do you? He tapped a control panel beside him. And suddenly, all the lights went red. Zivak's monocle interface flickered as emergency alerts flooded his vision. Warning. Gravity coorif failure imminent. Warning. Station self-destruct initiate. Time until critical fail. 5 minutes. Zivak's expression twisted in disbelief. What did you do? Daniel grinned. Nothing. This station was falling apart before I even got here. I just gave it a little nudge. The floor trembled. Panels burst apart as electrical surges fried every system on board. And then, without another word, Daniel turned and ran. Zivak roared in frustration. Wait. But Daniel was already gone. The final escape. Daniel sprinted through the station, dodging collapsing debris. He barely made it back to his ship, the irregularity, as the entire station shook apart around him. With a single button press, he fired the engines, blasting away from Alpha 9 just as it detonated in a brilliant explosion of fire and metal. He watched from his cockpit, taking a deep breath. Then he smiled. Nice try, Zivak. But as he set course for deep space, he knew this wasn't over. The Drakari Dominion wasn't finished with him yet, and neither was he.